Part 1. My name is Richard, and for the longest time, I thought I had the perfect life. I had a beautiful wife, Karen, who I married right out of college. We met when we were both in our early 20s, and it felt like fate had brought us together. She was everything I wanted. Gorgeous, intelligent, and ambitious, yet down to earth in a way that made her seem real. We built a life together, a life that I was proud of. The house we bought in the suburbs was cozy, the kind of place that felt like home as soon as you stepped inside. We had a daughter, Lisa, who was 5 years old, and I loved her more than anything. Everything seemed perfect. We didn't have the kind of love that was overly dramatic. It wasn't the stuff of fairy tales, but it was solid. Karen and I got along, and though our lives were busy, we made it a point to keep things together. Weekends were family time. We'd go to the park, grab ice cream, or just relax at home, binge-watching movies after Lisa went to bed. We'd talk about our dreams, our goals, and our plans for the future. I was content, and I genuinely believed that Karen was too. It wasn't always smooth sailing, of course. We had our disagreements now and then, but nothing that felt like it would threaten what we had. Karen was a stay-at-home mom, and I worked in finance. I provided for our family, and she kept everything running smoothly at home. We had a rhythm, a kind of understanding between us that made it all work. I trusted her implicitly, and she trusted me in return. She was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, and I thought I was everything she wanted as well. Our daughter, Lisa, was the light of our lives. She was a curious, bright little girl who loved to play and explore. Karen and I would spend hours watching her grow, talking about her future and how we hoped we could provide her with everything she needed. I was excited to see where life would take us as a family, and I believe that Karen felt the same way. But as time went on, I started to notice subtle changes. Little things that I didn't think much of at first. Karen was more distant. She spent more time on her phone, often scrolling through it while we were watching TV or when we were having dinner. It wasn't like her. She used to engage in our conversations, make eye contact, and laugh at my jokes. But now, she'd be lost in her phone, her attention clearly elsewhere. She'd sometimes smile at the screen, a kind of smile that seemed forced, like she was trying to hide something. At first, I didn't think much of it. Life was busy, and I didn't want to overthink things. Maybe she was just tired. She had been a stay-at-home mom for years, and sometimes the monotony of it all could get to anyone. It wasn't unusual for her to check her phone for work emails or messages from friends. I brushed it off. After all, she had her own life, and I had mine. We were both adults who had our own responsibilities. But the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right started to settle in my chest. I began noticing other things as well. Karen would leave the house more often, claiming she needed time for herself. She'd go out with friends, sometimes late into the evening. I had no reason to doubt her, but something about it didn't sit well with me. I tried to be supportive, encouraging her to take some time for herself since she had been spending so much time with Lisa and at home. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was pulling away from me. Our conversations grew more strained, and the small gestures of affection that we once shared disappeared. The kisses goodbye before work, the random hugs, the holding of hands, those things started to fade. At the same time, I was busy with my work. The pressure at the office was growing, and I had to dedicate more time to my career. I told myself that maybe it was just a phase. Maybe we were both just tired from the daily grind, and once things settled down, we'd get back to normal. After all, we had been through so much together, and I was sure that whatever this was, it would pass. But deep down, I felt a distance between us growing that I couldn't explain. It was like a wall had been erected without me even realizing it. Karen seemed preoccupied whenever I tried to talk to her. I'd ask her how her day was, and she'd give me short answers, not the usual enthusiastic replies I was accustomed to. She'd talk about what Lisa had been doing, but when it came to her own day, it was like pulling teeth to get any details. I tried not to let it bother me, but every conversation felt more and more like a one-sided exchange. I felt like I was talking to a stranger. It wasn't the Karen I had married, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. Life had its ups and downs, and maybe we were just going through a rough patch. People didn't always talk about the small cracks in their relationships, but that didn't mean they weren't there. I convinced myself that it was just a phase and that I shouldn't overanalyze things. I needed to be patient. I was a man who believed in the power of persistence. If I just stayed the course, things would get better. But the cracks kept widening, and I had no idea how deep the betrayal would go. Part 2. It's funny how life works sometimes. You go through your days thinking everything is fine, and then suddenly, something hits you, and you realize you've been blind to the signs. The signs that were always there, but you chose not to see them. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The distance between Karen and me had grown too wide. The subtle changes had turned into glaring red flags, and I was starting to wake up to the reality that something was seriously wrong. It was a Wednesday evening when I first started to piece things together. I had just returned from work, exhausted but ready to spend some time with my family. I expected the usual. Karen making dinner while Lisa played in the living room, the sound of the TV in the background, and the sense of warmth that only home could bring. But when I walked in, the house felt different. There was a strange coldness to it, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Karen was on the couch, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. Her attention was completely fixed on it, and she didn't even notice me walk in. Lisa was sitting beside her, coloring in a book, but the whole scene seemed off. The house was usually filled with noise, the constant hum of family life. But tonight, there was silence, awkward, heavy silence. I set my briefcase down and walked over to Karen. I leaned over to kiss her on the cheek, but she flinched, just slightly, enough for me to notice. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She just nodded, barely acknowledging my presence. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice casual, though my mind was already on edge. "Fine," she replied, not looking up from her phone. "Busy." Her response was short, dismissive even. It wasn't like her. Karen had always been the one to ask about my day, to engage with me. Now, it felt like we were strangers. My stomach twisted, but I told myself not to overreact. She was tired, maybe distracted. But this wasn't the first time it had happened. Karen's phone had become an obsession. She'd constantly check it, even in the middle of conversations. I would catch glimpses of her texts, just enough to see names that I didn't recognize. And there were late-night phone calls, sometimes lasting for hours, always with the door closed. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. After all, I trusted Karen. But as the weeks went on, I began to notice a pattern. She had become more and more secretive, shutting me out in ways that were impossible to ignore. Then there was the sudden change in her appearance. Karen had always been beautiful, effortlessly so. But now, she was spending hours on her hair and makeup, doing her nails, and dressing up for no reason. She would leave the house in outfits that were more revealing than usual, and I would catch her looking at herself in the mirror with a kind of satisfaction that made me uneasy. She was changing, but I couldn't figure out why. One evening, I decided to confront her about it. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Karen was sitting on the couch again, this time texting with one hand while absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine with the other. The usual coldness was there, that invisible wall that had been growing between us for months. "Karen," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "We need to talk." She didn't look up from her phone. "Not now, Richard. I'm busy." Now, I insisted. I wasn't going to back down this time. "What's going on with us? You've been distant. You barely talk to me anymore. What happened to us?" She finally put the phone down and looked at me, but there was no emotion in her eyes, just exhaustion. "Nothing's wrong," she said, her tone defensive. "You're just overthinking things." "I don't think I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm noticing the way you're acting. The phone calls, the late nights, the secretive behavior. I'm not stupid, Karen. Something is going on, and I want to know what it is." Karen sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Richard, it's not what you think. I don't know. I've been feeling. I don't know. I just need some space." I felt a pang in my chest. Space. That was the excuse she was giving me. It wasn't the first time she had said that, but this time it felt different, colder, like she was pulling away from me entirely. The words she had spoken didn't make sense. What was she feeling? What was going on in her life that she couldn't talk to me about? "I'm not asking for space, Karen. I'm asking for the truth," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "I want to know what's really going on." She didn't answer me right away. Instead, she stood up and walked to the other room, leaving me standing there, confused and hurt. I had no idea what was happening, but I could feel the relationship slipping through my fingers, like sand falling through a sieve. Something had changed, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. That night, after Karen had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind. The texts, the late nights, the way she had been acting. It didn't add up. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from me, something that I was never meant to find out. I made a decision that night, one that I would later regret but also be thankful for. I needed answers, and I would stop at nothing to get them. Part 3. The next few days passed in a fog of tension. I kept telling myself that I had to trust Karen, that maybe I was just overreacting, but the truth kept eating away at me. Every time I saw her face, I couldn't ignore the feeling of betrayal that was lurking beneath the surface. She was still distant, still preoccupied with her phone, still making excuses. This was not normal. I wasn't stupid enough to ignore the warning signs. I started making plans. Quiet. Careful. I knew I had to tell Karen the truth, but I wasn't going to do it without proof. If I was going to accuse her of something as serious as cheating, I needed to know for sure. I had to be sure that I hadn't let my fears get the better of me. I started watching her more closely, following her every move. I knew it was unhealthy, but I couldn't help myself. I needed answers. Every time she went to the bathroom with her phone, I caught myself looking at the door, wondering what she was doing behind it. I paid attention to the times she left the house, girls' nights out, or errands that seemed to be happening more and more often. I soon noticed a pattern. She was always gone longer than she said she would be. There were times when she would come home late, way too late, with no explanation as to where she had been. One night, I decided to follow her. I know it sounds wrong, but I had to find out. I needed to know where she was going and who she was meeting. I waited until she told me she was going out with friends, and when she left, I followed her from a distance, keeping my car far enough behind to go unnoticed. My heart was pounding in my chest as I drove, part of me hoping that I was wrong, that there was a completely innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong. Karen's car took me to a small bar downtown that I had never heard of before. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she entered the building. It was not a place she usually frequented. I could tell it wasn't her usual crowd, and the look on her face as she walked inside told me all I needed to know. She didn't hesitate, didn't look back to see if I was following her. She was too comfortable, too well aware of what was going on inside. I sat there for what seemed like an eternity, watching the bar from the comfort of my car. About 20 minutes later, I saw a man walk into the bar. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with confidence, which immediately struck me as something out of place. I couldn't shake the feeling that I recognized him, but I couldn't figure out how. And then it hit me. It was Andrew. Andrew was Karen's best friend and mine as well, someone I had known for years, someone I trusted with everything. He was practically a member of my family. They were close before we got married, but I never thought about it. They were just friends. But now, when I saw them walking into a bar together, I realized that I was blind. I was blind to the obvious signs that were right in front of me. The sinking feeling in my stomach deepened. I didn't know how long they had been inside, but after what seemed like hours, they finally came out. Karen was laughing, her hand resting lightly on Andrew's arm. It was the laugh she used to give me, the laugh that made me feel special, that made me feel like I was the one who belonged in her heart. But now it wasn't for me, it was for him. I watched them get into Andrew's car and drive off together. It was proof. The proof I needed. I couldn't deny it anymore. My wife was cheating on me. With my best friend. The person I trusted. The person I shared everything with. They were in it together, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. I sat in the car for what seemed like an eternity, looking at the road in front of me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone out the window, tear everything apart and let the truth hit me, but I couldn't. I couldn't let them know what I knew. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to gather evidence, to make sure I had everything in place before I met her face to face. I couldn't risk her denying it. I couldn't risk her lying to me again. The next few days were unbearable. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The image of Karen laughing with Andrew in that bar played over and over in my head like a broken record. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Every time she came near me, I felt disgusted. I felt betrayed, hurt, and lost. But I had to keep up the facade. I had to act like everything was normal until I got everything I needed. I started tracking her phone using a GPS tracking app. It wasn't something I was proud of, but at that moment I didn't care. I needed to find out the truth. I needed to know where she was going, who she was meeting. I followed her every move, every message, every call. The more I learned, the worse it got. Karen's phone revealed everything. Text messages between her and Andrew, messages that were more than friendly, messages that made it clear they were in a relationship. Late-night calls, flirty words exchanged under the guise of friendship. And then there were the photos. Photos of them together, their faces covered, their smiles fake. They were not hiding anything. They thought I wouldn't find out, but I did. I found out everything. The evidence was obvious, and the weight of it crashed down on me. It was time. Time to confront her. Time to destroy everything she had built. Time to expose her lies. Part 4. The truth was out there, and now I had to act. The evidence I had gathered over the past few days was damning. Karen and Andrew had been involved for longer than I could have imagined, and the thought of it made my stomach turn. Every text message, every call, every meeting they had while I was kept in the dark, everything pointed to the same conclusion. I had been betrayed. Worse, I had been lied to for months, perhaps even longer. And the fact that it was with Andrew, my best friend, the man I had trusted like a brother, made the betrayal even more personal. But as angry as I was, I couldn't rush into this. I had to be calculated, methodical. I needed to make sure I had everything in place before I confronted Karen. I couldn't let her twist the narrative or make me feel like the crazy one. This had to be done the right way. I started by gathering all the evidence. I went through her phone again, screenshotting every message that made it clear she was cheating. I saved the phone records, the pictures, the times they were together. Every detail mattered. I printed everything out and made copies. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. I wasn't going to let her deny it or play it off as some misunderstanding. This was real, and I had the proof to back it up. The hardest part was the DNA test. I had no idea how I was going to get Karen to agree to it, but I knew it was the final piece I needed to expose her completely. I had to prove that Lisa, our daughter, was not mine. The thought of it made my heart break, but I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. If she had been sleeping with Andrew, there was no way to be sure that Lisa was mine. And if it turned out she wasn't, I needed to know. I decided to approach it carefully. Karen had been acting distant for weeks, and now it was time to confront her. I waited for the right moment, a moment when she was calm, when she wouldn't be able to run away or hide behind excuses. One evening, I called her into the living room. I had everything ready, the printed out messages, the phone records, and a DNA test kit I had discreetly purchased online. Karen walked in, looking tired, as always. Her phone was in her hand, her eyes glued to it. She barely looked up when she sat down across from me. She had no idea what was coming. "Karen," I said, my voice steady, though inside I felt like I was drowning. "We need to talk." She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "About what?" she asked, clearly annoyed. I could see the defensiveness in her posture, the way she crossed her arms over her chest, like she was preparing for battle. "This," I said, slapping the stack of papers down on the table in front of her. "This is what we need to talk about." Karen's face went pale as she looked at the papers. Her eyes flickered to the DNA test kit, and then back to me. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was speechless. I didn't let her off the hook. "You've been cheating on me with Andrew, haven't you?" I asked, my voice sharp with the anger I had been holding inside for so long. "And now I find out that Lisa might not even be my daughter. I trusted you, Karen. I trusted you with everything, and you've betrayed me in the worst possible way." For a moment, there was only silence. The weight of my words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Karen looked like she was going to crumble under the pressure, but she quickly composed herself. "Richard," she began, her voice shaky. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed bitterly. "Not what it looks like." The messages, the phone calls, the late nights, the pictures. "Karen, you can't deny it anymore. I know everything. And now I'm going to make sure you don't get away with it." She opened her mouth again, but I raised my hand to stop her. "No. I'm done listening to your excuses. You've lied to me for months, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." The words hit her hard. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't care. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. "Please, Richard," she pleaded. "Don't do this. I made a mistake. I never meant to hurt you. I love you." "Love me?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "You don't love me, Karen. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have destroyed everything we built together. You wouldn't have torn our family apart." I didn't know how to feel anymore. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw her out of the house and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her with everything I had, wanted to understand. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why she had done this to us. But I already knew the answer. Karen finally broke down, tears streaming down her face as she begged for forgiveness. "I was lonely," she sobbed. "I felt neglected. You were always working, always focused on your job. I needed attention, Richard. I wanted to feel desired again. And then Andrew, he was there for me. He made me feel like I mattered. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get this far. I didn't want to hurt you. I felt a surge of anger. You didn't want to hurt me? You betrayed me, Karen. You destroyed everything for a few moments of attention. Do you even realize what you've done? I could see the guilt in her eyes now, but it was too late. The damage had been done. There was no going back. Give me the test, I said, my voice cold. I want to know the truth about Lisa. I want to know if she's mine or if she's his. Karen's face fell, and she handed me the DNA test kit, her hands trembling. The final piece of the puzzle was in my hands now. And once I had the results, there would be no turning back. Our lives would never be the same again. Part 5. The test results came back a few days later. The moment I opened the envelope, I knew. I had already braced myself for the worst, but seeing it in black and white hit me like a punch to the gut. The DNA test confirmed what I had feared all along. Lisa was not my daughter. She was Andrew's. The reality of it tore me apart, and I couldn't breathe. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was biological. The child I had raised, the daughter I had loved and cared for, wasn't even mine. And it wasn't just my wife who had lied to me, but my best friend, the man I had trusted like a brother. I had been living a lie, and the truth had come crashing down harder than anything I could have imagined. I sat there for hours, staring at the test results, trying to process what I had just discovered. I felt sick to my stomach, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Karen had done this to me. She had destroyed everything, the life we had built, our family, our trust, over a few moments of desire, a need for attention. And Andrew, the man who had known me better than anyone, had helped her tear my world apart. It was almost too much to bear, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I couldn't. I wasn't going to allow them to keep living their lives like nothing had happened, like they hadn't ruined mine. It was time to destroy their lives, just as they had destroyed mine. I wasn't going to be the one left holding the pieces while they carried on, unscathed. The first thing I did was file for divorce. There was no way I could stay married to Karen after everything that had happened. I couldn't even look at her without feeling disgusted. I wanted to make it clear that there would be no reconciliation, no second chances. This was the end. I hired a lawyer, someone I trusted, and I made sure to include everything I had gathered, from the messages to the DNA test, to ensure that I had the upper hand in court. But it didn't end there. I wasn't just going to divorce her and let her move on with her life. I was going to expose everything. I contacted a journalist, a friend of mine who worked for a local news outlet, and I told them everything. I sent them the evidence. I made sure that they had everything they needed to tell the story. I wanted the world to know what Karen and Andrew had done. I wanted them to feel the consequences of their actions, the same way I was. Karen's reputation was everything to her. She had built a life around appearances, around being the perfect wife, the perfect mother. She had always wanted to be admired, to be seen as desirable. Well, now the world was going to see her for who she truly was, a liar, a cheater, a woman who had betrayed the man who loved her. The thought of it brought me a sick kind of satisfaction. She didn't deserve to walk away from this unscathed. But it wasn't just Karen I was going after. Andrew was going to pay too. I called up a few of his business contacts, people I knew who worked with him. I made sure they knew the truth about what had happened. I didn't tell them everything, but I made sure they understood the kind of man he was, a man who would destroy a friendship, a family, for his own selfish desires. I wanted to make sure his career took a hit. He didn't deserve to keep his job after what he had done. He didn't deserve anything. When Karen found out that I had contacted the press and reached out to people about Andrew, she went ballistic. She begged me to stop, pleaded with me to reconsider. But I was beyond saving her now. There was no going back. The damage had been done. The truth was out, and I was going to make sure they both suffered for it. She tried to apologize, to tell me that it wasn't all Andrew's fault, that she had been the one to initiate it, that it had been her mistake. But it didn't matter anymore. She had done it. She had chosen him over me, and I wasn't going to let her take any more of my time or energy. The woman I had loved and trusted was gone. In her place was a stranger who had shattered everything I had believed in. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Karen fought me every step of the way, trying to hold on to as much as she could, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I fought for full custody of Lisa, knowing that she wasn't my biological daughter, but still wanting to protect her from Karen's lies. I didn't know what would happen with Lisa, whether she would be better off with Karen or not, but I wasn't going to let Karen raise her in a world built on deception. In the end, the court granted me custody of Lisa, and Karen was left with nothing. No husband, no daughter, no reputation. Everything she had worked so hard for had been destroyed. And Andrew? He lost his job, his career, and his friends. His reputation was tarnished beyond repair. The life they had built for themselves was gone, and it was because of their own choices. I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't feel bad for what I had done. I had been the one betrayed, the one who had been lied to. I had given them every opportunity to make things right, but they had chosen to destroy me. And now it was my turn to destroy them. As I stood in the courtroom, watching Karen and Andrew lose everything they had, I felt a sense of closure. I wasn't the one who had destroyed our family. Karen and Andrew had done that. But I was the one who had taken control of my life again. And as I walked out of that courtroom, I knew I was free. Free from their lies. Free from their betrayal. And I was going to make sure that nothing ever brought me down again. The end.